On this Sunday, we find ourselves just about halfway through the season of Lent. This Sunday is the midpoint for the Sundays in Lent, although we have a little bit to go before we're at the actual midpoint through the season of Lent. But I thought it would be a good time for us to just look back and see what we have learned. What we have learned on this journey we are taking through the wilderness. Now, I want to be very clear that when we talk about what we've learned, and as I look at that this morning, I am thinking not so much of just some understandings maybe that have become clear, but rather what are some new skills we have acquired? What are some new skills that we've been challenged to acquire within our lives? I've never had the opportunity to take survival training, to take a course where you learn specific survival skills, but I've always been fascinated by those courses and the different curriculum that they contain. Now, I have had the opportunity to go on hikes with people who have had survival skills training, and it's always so fascinating to be with them because as you are walking along, they may point out a plant and say, oh, well, there's a plant that's edible. You can eat that plant. And then maybe a little later, they look at another plant and say, oh, but you don't want to touch that one. It's poisonous. And I'm always trying to make this mental note of what that poisonous plant looks like. I'm not sure exactly why, but just in case sometime I'm in a wilderness lost, I want to make sure not to touch or eat that plant. And then these people will go on and say, oh, I believe there's a water source over there. And they'll explain how you can tell where that water source is.
Word, and it's
or maybe they'll look at trees and say, oh, I can tell that this is westward facing and this is east. It's interesting to be with someone who has those survival skills.
This week, I think we're all
it's almost
really
as if you put
spring.
them into a wilderness setting,
as a time
and
to
they see possibilities. They see this picture of what can happen and how one can find what you would need. The basic needs are all there.
Or even horror.
And this is in contrast to someone without those skills. You place that person in the very same location, the very same spot in the wilderness,
for our Lenten worship and devotions,
none of that picture.
My first reaction was to groan.
In fact, they may only be concerned with what is not present. They do not believe that it is even possible to exist very long without what they have carried in with them.
And I decided I would make the best of the 40 days before Easter and see what the wilderness
I've been mentioning the desert fathers and mothers from the 3rd and 4th century that went out to the wilderness, went out to the desert. Now, they went to an arid place because they wanted to be somewhere where they could focus completely on Christ. Some would not see that as a picture of a place you would want to go to, but for them, it was full of possibilities. I think about our own lives and this first skill I believe we need to incorporate in our lives. When we are living our lives, do we see the possibilities? Do we see what is there, the complete picture? Or are we like the people who only see what is missing, what is not there? And are we in a position where we complain? Well, in order to have those skills developed in one's life, you need to give attention to your preparation. Preparation is critical to develop those survival skills. A book written some years ago entitled Into Thin Air, the book was written by John Krakauer, talked about an expedition to climb Mount Everest. And in this book, John talks about the various preparations that people made to go on this expedition. Now, what has developed in climbing Mount Everest is these different tour companies that will take you as long as you pay a large sum of money, and they're not concerned with how prepared you are necessarily as long as you pay that sum. And Krakauer in his book talks about the dire consequences for those that entered this harsh environment without the proper preparation and training. See, for those that can apply their survival skills, we find a second skill present here. And that is the skill to study and learn, but to study and learn in a way that you can apply that knowledge to what you are encountering in everyday life. And that's what those survival people are able to do, those that have taken those courses and find themselves in the wilderness and see all the potential. Actually, the people of Israel had that opportunity to be prepared. They had the opportunity to be prepared when they were still in Egypt. Moses was there, and there were incredible works being done through the power of God. These plagues at that time were ways God was active, and God was convincing Pharaoh that he should let the people of Israel leave slavery. The people of Israel experienced the Passover, which will become so critical to their very existence moving forward. As they entered the wilderness, the desert, they had a way made for them to cross through the Red Sea. The people of Israel had the opportunity to have provided for them food on a daily basis. See, they had this time to prepare, and hopefully there could have been present this skill to take that preparation and apply it to what they were experiencing, because once again they were in a situation where they had a need, but that application was not necessarily being made. I think about that for our own lives as we are in this season of Lent. Even as we try to take a few steps into the wilderness, even as we come into a more extreme setting, because it's in these extreme environments that often we become so much more aware of where our skill set is. Because we too have had the opportunity to learn and prepare. As we have read and studied the Hebrew Bible, as we have read and studied about the coming of the incarnate God, the life of Christ, as we are reminded and reflect during this season of Lent on the way of the cross and then the empty tomb, we have had the opportunity to learn, but have we applied our knowledge to our everyday life situation? Think of these first two skills. The first skill being seeing the potential, and it's buoyed up by this second skill of our learning, our preparation that we're able to apply to what it is we see in our everyday lives. Well, for the people of Israel, they come now to this place where once again they unfortunately were not applying what they'd already experienced and should have known. And I believe this place where they come to brings us an incredibly strong image. It is an image of this rock. And it's an image that shows us of how we can harden our lives. We harden our very hearts to what is possible. And yet it's at this place that Moses strikes that rock and there is water that flows. See, I think that last skill that we need to have and what we have acquired during our journey thus far in the wilderness is the thought of being willing to open our very lives, to open our hearts that can become so hard, and to allow the living water to flow into our lives. And just as importantly, to allow that living water to flow out of our lives. John records in his gospel that those that are followers of Christ will have streams of living water that flow out of their lives. See, when we put all these skills together, where we are living our lives right now, we first of all have a sense of what the picture is and the contrast that can exist in our lives when we are aware of what that picture truly is. See, if we've done the work of preparation, we know that we need to apply what we have learned to the real life situations we find ourselves in today. And then we need to, with intentionality, and I believe it's a skill, with intentionality, we need to have hearts and lives that are open to receive the living water from God, and open to allow that living water, that living life to flow through each of us. Because it needs to be flowing to those who may be seeking the basic essentials of clean water. It needs to flow to those that are seeking to have food on a daily basis. It needs to flow to those that are seeking stability in their shelter and housing. I believe these are skills. They're not just learnings. They're the application of what we have learned to everyday realities that are with us right now. And I pray that our time in the wilderness will give us this opportunity to understand that we need to apply those skills right here, where we are living right now. Do we see the complete picture? But within that picture, do we see the potential to apply what we know and have learned of the presence of Christ and God's work in our lives and the world? And are we willing to not be hard-hearted, but to have lives open to the living water that can flow through us to others? To God be the glory. Amen.